So I do a lot of work in diversity, inclusion, equality, and in these sorts of spaces. And I believe that it's really important in these spaces when you have a position of privilege or power that is acknowledged and recognized, and especially the limitations of that position be recognized. And in one sense, it's about verbally acknowledging that. And in another sense, it's about putting action to that, or in a lot of instances, inaction. So I try to always, when I'm put into spaces where there's a very diverse group of people, to take that as an opportunity to acknowledge my own biases, my own privilege, my own position of power, and then do my best to kind of recede into the background so that I can listen to and attend to the conversation that other people in the room are having, or the conversations that other people in the room are having or want to have. And this is just because this issue of implicit bias, it's a thing, right? It's like very well researched. We all know that it exists. It's important that when we're in these settings, that those implicit biases that we all possess, but certainly people in positions of privilege and power possess to a greater degree, that we recognize that those exist. And all an implicit bias is that your attitudes, perceptions, and kind of ways of thinking influence the decisions you make and the actions you take. So if we could paint kind of an opposite picture where I maybe acknowledge my position of power and privilege, but then when I'm taking action, when I'm making decisions, and when I'm kind of putting an agenda to the work that we're doing, I'm doing it more or less from my own perspective. That implicit bias has a real effect on those decisions, on those actions, because I haven't taken the opportunity to draw from a broader framework of ideas and perspectives in those decisions. And that's why I think it's really critical as a person who has a position of power and privilege to take that step back, to acknowledge, take a step back, listen, try to understand, try to relate, ask questions. And in these settings, I think it's also important to be able to find ways of drawing those perspectives out from those individuals, because a lot of times it can be really intimidating to try to bring forward an idea when you don't maintain that same level, that same position of power and privilege to some of the other people in the room. Now, I can't remember when I became aware of how to do all of this. I think it was more or less trial and error. I believe that in these spaces, I made enough mistakes, and people who I work with were kind enough to call me in and say, "Hey, Anthony, what you did, said, or how you acted back there, you kind of, you should check your privilege and try to understand how that might read to the other people in the room." So that's been one really, really key way of kind of overcoming my own implicit biases. The other way has just been in getting positive reinforcement for having acknowledged my position of power and privilege, and for opening up space for more diverse views to be discussed, communicated, considered, elaborated on, and decided on. So one of the ways that I became aware of this issue as a key point of human behavior and the way we think and act was I was working at the time rather closely with a neuroscientist, and this guy was brilliant. He's absolute genius when it comes to these issues. And one of the things he exposed me to was that there was this experiment done in the early days of virtual reality, where a person, say a man, would be put into the presenting body of a woman, so that when they were looking at themselves in a mirror, they didn't see themselves as presenting as a man, they saw themselves presenting as a woman instead. And that because what this study found was basically that having that experience from another person's perspective kind of helped cultivate empathy, help cultivate understanding, build bridges, try to find ways of connecting with someone who has a different experience than you. And so that was kind of a first kind of exposure to this idea of implicit bias, and then the first chance that I had to really reflect on and think about, well, how am I seeing the world, and how might that be different than someone who is a different gender than I am, who has a different sexual orientation than I do, who has a different skin color than I have, who comes from a different country, a different socioeconomic background, different language background. How might my world have been shaped? How have my perceptions shaped my decisions? And how can I seek understanding and connection with someone who has a different experience than me without having to put on a VR headset every time I want to make that connection. There have been a lot of opportunities that I've been kind of benefited from that have allowed me to cultivate a higher degree of awareness of the different diverse experiences of people who exist in this world. And I think that's one really critical component of this understanding of our own biases and how we can kind of find ways of becoming aware of those biases and the effects that those biases can have on the interactions we have with others. So just having a clear connection, understanding, awareness of the vast diversity of human experiences that are out there can really, really help your perception of anything, of life in general. And so I've always taken it as a point of intention to try to connect with other human beings who have very different backgrounds than I do. And in the course of the last 20 years of my professional career, I've really been able to hone in and try to seek out even more diverse experiences. So there's subsets upon subsets upon subsets of human diverse experiences that we can try to relate to, try to seek understanding of, and empathy and compassion for those experiences. And I think that for me, for my professional development, for my life satisfaction, has been incredibly, incredibly valuable. And in doing this, in creating these connections and trying to understand the subset upon subset of diverse human experiences, it's given me opportunities to do better and be better as a person and as a employee and as a family member and everything else. What that means is it hasn't given me clear instructions on what to do, at least not always. What it has done, though, is given me an arena of action. It's given me a framework to see what are the opportunities that I have to kind of improve upon the work that I'm doing by drawing in those perspectives and by finding ways of elevating those voices and decentering myself in order to recenter attention and resources on those individuals that are underrepresented in our social lives. Now, that's not to say that somehow, now that I've achieved all this glory, that I am free of implicit bias. Quite the opposite. If anything, I am now even more keenly aware of the implicit biases that I have than ever before. That doesn't change the fact that they're there. It only changes that I acknowledge them and I try to make other people aware of them so that they understand that when I say something, it comes from a very a perspective that has been influenced by my positions of power and privilege. And so I don't think I will ever not struggle with implicit bias. I think that it will be part of who I am my entire life. Being aware of it doesn't eliminate it. And every year I discover a new bias that I have because of the world around me, the way I grew up. There's so many different factors here. So when I see that my bias, my power and privilege has kind of influenced the decision I've made. And in doing so, I have not heard the voices of a group of people who become or who may become marginalized by that decision or further disenfranchised by that decision. That is a really critical learning opportunity for me. And I want to be clear on what that means. A learning opportunity for me when it comes to my own implicit bias is not meant to say that I rely on marginalized communities to tell me what to do, think, or act. It's an opportunity for me to reflect on what that privilege and power means in my life and how that might affect the lives of others, and especially how that might affect the lives of people who are marginalized or who are disenfranchised in society. So this is a kind of a critical issue that I've tried to take on in my life. I work with a diverse group of people, so I'm constantly trying to better myself, and I'm constantly seeking input and feedback from those individuals. I try to check my expectations, and especially when it comes to the language that I use. This is one of the things that is very easy to change and can make a world of difference when it comes to interacting and relating to people from across the diversity of human experience. Be aware of the language that you use. Try your best to seek out an understanding from those communities of the kinds of the language that they want you to use, and adopt that language, those characteristics, adopt that parlance, because that shows the most respect, that shows the most deference to those communities, and positions them in their world at the center of what they want, and not positions you at the center of how you interpret that world or that experience. So always seek out understanding in how we use our language, and you seek understanding of how we use our language from the communities who are living those experiences every day. And the takeaway here is kind of, I guess, good and bad. It's simply that having an implicit bias doesn't make you a bad person. It's not normative in that sense. We're all affected by male supremacy and white supremacy and societal expectations around ableism and everything else that you could imagine. Having those implicit biases because of the way you grew up, because of the media that you consume, is not necessarily doesn't make you a bad person. Let me be clear. But if you don't acknowledge that, or if you pretend that it doesn't exist, or that it doesn't affect your decisions, that really does at least call for greater reflection and understanding of the world around you. My call to action is talk to someone, a close friend or colleague, anyone who has a very different experience than you do, or a different experience than anyone who you've ever met before. Try to find that spectrum of human diversity that's out there and invite that in to your life in some way, sense, or shape or form. And then if you're connected to that individual, you're close to them, and if you've built a relationship of trust, ask them to reflect back to you on your own implicit biases. That will help you understand a bit better about how you can do better and be better. This will also help you grow as an individual and as a person who's occupying the same space as everyone else in the world.